Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to learn about CSS variables. I'll just take you through building a really bare bones web page, and while doing so, I'll implement some CSS variables so that you'll get to see how they're made, how they work, what they are, and mainly why we would want to use CSS variables. I'll also give you just a broad overview of what variables in programming are, and hopefully you'll come away with a solid understanding. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so here I am in VS Code, and I have a really unexciting web page being built here. I have in my index.html 3 elements, a nav, a main, and a footer. I made a really short reset CSS just to get rid of any browser implemented padding and margin, and to just make a standard font size of 32 pixels. In my style.css, I went ahead and gave those elements some height. I made the body 100% of the viewport height just by giving it a height of 100 VH, which basically is short for percentage of the viewport height. And then I gave the nav a height of 10% of that. I gave main a height of 70% of that, and a footer of 10% of that. I realize that doesn't add up to 100%, and that's fine. So let's have a look at this web project. Here is what it looks like. Not too exciting. Let's say that I want to add border to all 3 of these items, and I want that border to look exactly the same for all 3. So I could go over to my CSS and apply border. And I could make it 5 pixels, solid, black. And I could go ahead and just copy this to the other elements. And I have accomplished that goal of giving them all the same border. And as you can see, it's being applied. That's great, but what if I wanted to change the color of it or change any aspect of it? That would mean I would have to go and change it for all 3 of these. When it's just 3 of them, it's not so bad, but as you'll soon find out, if you haven't already, that projects can get pretty big in scale. And if you're trying to keep consistency in certain stylings that apply to many different elements, it can be cumbersome and difficult to find all of those elements and change them. So if I want to make this border yellow, I don't want to have to, change all these to yellow. I want to find a simpler way to do that. And that's where CSS variables come in handy. So real quick, I'm going to give you a broad understanding of what a variable is in programming. A variable in programming is a place to store something. It has a value that we give it. We store a value in a variable. And a value can be anything really that we can create with whichever programming language we're working with. In most cases, it can be stored in a variable. So in the case of CSS, stylings can be stored in a variable. And what's convenient about storing things in a variable is that later you can call them. Every variable has a name. We give it that name. We will name our variables when we create them, so that later in our code, we can call that variable's name and receive the value that we stored in it. And we can do that many times over if we want to. That's the beauty of variables, and it is an incredibly common concept in programming, and it's really quite simple. So in CSS, there's a certain syntax for declaring variables, and there's a certain syntax for calling the variables. But first and foremost, we have to know where to declare our CSS variables. The convention for doing so is to declare them with the root selector, :root. This selector represents the outermost container of our project. The reason we want to declare our variables at the outermost level of our project is so that they will apply and cascade to anywhere, any child, anywhere in our project. These variables will be accessible. You might think of the HTML tag as being sort of the outermost level of a project, and truthfully, you could declare CSS variables with an HTML selector and it would pretty much work, but it is convention to use this root selector just to guarantee that you're declaring your variables at the outermost level of the project so that they can be accessed anywhere inside of that project. So I wanted to make a variable for the border. The way we declare a variable is in CSS, is with dash dash. The dash dash indicates that this is a variable. We have to give the variable a name. And in general, you want to give it a name that describes what it is. So we will just call this one my border. And we will give it the value of 5px solid black. So then, rather than explicitly declaring the value for the border in each element, we can call our variable. And the way that we do that is with the var keyword. VS Code will likely help you out and just give you the parentheses like that. And it should likely give you a drop-down of all of the CSS variables that you've declared on this CSS file, which in this case is just one. So we'll go ahead and do that for all three. Var parentheses followed by the variable name. And you might be wondering, well, okay, you had to go in and change those all individually. True, but now I will never have to do that again, even if I want to change the border. To change the border for all three of those elements, all I have to do is change this one. So as you can see, the border is being applied, but I want it to be yellow. Okay, all I got to do is change this to yellow. And that will apply to all of the places where I'm calling that variable. And there it is. Maybe now you're starting to get an idea of the beauty of CSS variables. And you might be wondering, well, couldn't I have done that with a class as well? Yes, you could have. You could make a class that's for, border 5px solid yellow and add that class to whichever tags that you want to have that border. But the beauty of CSS variables is that they're all declared right here in the same place. And they're just kind of nice with a one-line declaration. And you can sort of build your styling themes up here at the top. And styling themes are important because consistency is important with web pages. It's a very fundamental design principle for colors to match, for spacings to match, for borders to match. Consistency is important. So, oftentimes a website will have like a primary color and a secondary color and maybe a text color and a secondary text color, something like that. So let's go ahead and make some of those. We'll define a variable for primary color. And we'll make that purple. A little disclaimer here, I am not a designer. These style choices are not meant to look good. They're simply meant to demonstrate CSS variables. So please don't judge my design skills. We'll declare another CSS variable for secondary color. And we'll make that one green. And we'll do maybe a primary text color. And that'll be yellow, just like our border. And finally, we'll do a secondary text color, and that will be pink. Okay. Beautiful colors. So now what's cool is in VS Code, we actually can see all these colors together. So you can kind of see your color theme right here in one place. That's nice, and then you also see your border here. That's nice. So let's start applying some of those. We want the nav to have the primary background color. So, maybe I would want to call this, primary background color, just to sort of be more explicit about what these variables are. When you name your variables, you want to make sure that it makes sense, that it's descriptive of what it is. The reason I didn't call it purple is because maybe later I'll decide that the primary color will be something completely different than purple. Okay, so I want the nav to have a background color. Don't forget your semicolons. I want it to have a background color of the primary background color. So we say var, and now you can see I have a few more variables to choose from, and I'll go with my primary background color. I want it to have the text color of the primary text color. Okay. Let's just go ahead and add some background color to the main. Don't forget your semicolons. And I want this to be var secondary background color. And I want the text color to be my variable for secondary text. Great. And we'll just go ahead and make the footer coloring the same as the nav. Cool. It's looking pretty good. I don't like how the borders are doubling up here. I want a little bit of space in between these elements. So standardizing space is also a good idea. I could declare a variable for that, say my spacing, and I'm going to make it 10 pixels. So now I can use that variable anywhere I want. I could go to main and say margin top var my spacing. I could do the same for the footer. And that applied that spacing above the main and above the footer, and they're exactly the same. And if later I decide that's not enough spacing, I want it to be 30 pixels, done. Changes it for both of them. And as you can imagine, that could be really handy when that spacing is applied in many, many places. So that's basically the gist of it. As you can see, by just changing the value of the variable, I have the ability to change the styling in multiple places and maintain a consistency of coloring, spacing, border, whatever, throughout my web page, and have them all declared conveniently right here at the top of my CSS to be viewed sort of, in summary at the top. That's the gist of it. I hope that you use CSS variables in your upcoming web pages because they are handy and it'll make your life a lot easier. All right, happy coding, folks. Take care.